for an incredible afternoon here. I don't want to take much of Pranay's time because his story is going to be an incredibly interesting one. I met this character a little over a year ago in the second week of medical school, as I'm recalling, Pranay. And you know, in that round room, you know, that we walked by, I peeked in. I had to stand in the middle of this room and have Pranay over here on one of those tables behind me. Afterwards, I don't know, I was talking about the biochemistry of malnutrition or something that I need to learn more about. But Pranay came up and said, well, you know, you were raising the possibility of stunting being predisposing to obesity. He said, there are 3 papers that have been published on that, and he brought out his iPad and showed me what he had found. It's a learning experience to try to talk in front of really brilliant and wonderfully stimulating superstars like Pranay. And then, as Becca says, the opportunity that the Ram family created, I think it was after that, we were then, and here again, April Ballard is unbelievable. I said, can you help us find somebody? The Ram family wants to try to support someone going to southern India, and the only people I know there are in Vellore, and Dr. Ramakrishna is just a wonderful person, but I hadn't had a chance to ask him if he'd be willing to sort of take on a UVA student. Next thing I know, Pranay has not only connected, but as you're about to hear, forged a whole new collaboration as well as generating or finding some dynamite new data that he's going to share. So Pranay, thank you for teaching me so much, and you're going to teach me more, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think I just saw my presentation being next on the screen. That's not my presentation. Is this on the menu?
You guys can ask me about crazy on the web.
This week's been very bad between technology and
It's like their show will be. Bragging about it and trying to learn about crazy. There you go.
So time is short, and I just want to talk to you about the 6 weeks I spent in India working on the, responded by the Ram Family Global Health Scholar Award. The 3 things I wanted to take away from this presentation today are that poverty is disease, disease is poverty. Second, that diarrhea's toll on humans is not limited to the school days missed due to gastroenteritis, and I know something about that living in India, or the lives lost. It's far beyond that. And the third thing is that in global health, triage is really cool, but systemic changes are probably more important. This story starts with Dr. Guerrant, and he already started, and so I figured I'd embarrass him here too. He, for an Indian, I'm pretty tall at 5'11", and being in med school, people would say I'm kind of smart. And Dr. Guerrant proved to me that that's got nothing to do with anything special going around here. It's got to do with the fact that my parents saved me from diarrhea. And some of the data that he presented was like this. So on the x-axis here, you see it's got age. Oh, yeah, thank you. Nice one. Watch me not go to work this also. Okay. So on the x-axis, you've got age. On the y-axis, you've got HAZ, which is height for age Z-score. Essentially, the number of standard deviations you are away from the average height for that age. Okay? And you can see these kids who had 12 episodes of diarrhea before the age of 2, they suffered a precipitous fall in their height. And then they caught up a little bit, but not quite as much as the kids who had no diarrhea at all. In this set, on average, the kids had 9.1 episodes of diarrhea, and they lost 3.6 centimeters of height by the age of 7, which is pretty significant. And that's not, so the effect is not just on your height, it's also on your cognition. In this case, the x-axis is the number of episodes of diarrhea before the age of 2. The y-axis is your non-verbal IQ. This is again a study done by Dr. Guerrant, mind you, in Brazil. And you can see the kids with the most amount of diarrhea seem to have the lowest IQ. It's pretty shocking. And these two sequelae of diarrhea tied together nicely in this massive Philippine study with 2,000 children, in which they showed that the children who were most stunted at age 2 also did, pretty badly on the cognitive test. And the impairment was actually directly proportional to the time and degree of the stunting. So that's pretty convincing. Now, as with the molecular biology background that I had, I got interested in this aspect of it too. ApoE4, which is an appalling allele. It predisposes to Alzheimer's disease, to atherosclerosis. So how did we get this allele? Evolution is supposed to make you better. Turns out there's a survival advantage to it, really, because ApoE4 is neuroprotective in the context of diarrhea. So you can imagine that, firstly, it improves your absorption of fat from the gut, which is kind of important because during diarrhea, many of the bugs that cause diarrhea also efface the mucosa of the GI tract. And so the ability to absorb fat is kind of crucial because cholesterol is very important in brain development, because brain development is a lot of synapse formation, that is neurons connecting to each other. And so ApoE4 really mediates this, and it's really important. It may be a two-edged sword though, because the kids who had ApoE4 do, they take the diarrhea pretty well, their brain survives a little bit better, but then when they're older, then they get Alzheimer's and atherosclerosis. It's a two-edged sword, it's worth looking into. But why does all of this matter, really? Well, kind of because of this. Paul Farmer calls this the vicious cycle of poverty and disease. And you can see, you start with poverty, end up with diarrhea and malnutrition, then go to cognitive and physical impairment, and that low economic productivity and poverty. That's pretty important. So what do we do? When do we intervene? Well, this graph is from another massive study from 2010, 54 countries, and you see the growth faltering until the age of 24 months, and then it's basically the same. So what this starts telling you is that if you have to intervene, you've got to do that before this critical time of 24 months. Incidentally, that green series that I pointed out, that's South Asia, and that's mostly India. And interestingly, the one right above it is Sub-Saharan Africa. So South Asia is actually behind Sub-Saharan Africa in this, which is pretty embarrassing for me as an Indian. And now this is definitive proof that that is actually true. This is a Guatemalan study in which we saw that if you did a nutritional intervention before the age of 3, then you had a chance to improve the nonverbal IQ, you had a chance to reduce something, and their average age actually went up by 46%. But this effect was not significant after the age of 3. So that tells you that the time for intervention is very early. So I hope I've convinced you that poverty is disease, disease is poverty, and that diarrhea story is not limited to the school days lost or the lives lost even. So why did I go to India? Well, I wanted to know whether this effect of diarrhea and malnutrition persisted into adulthood, and I wanted to find that out in India. And so I went to Christian Medical College, Vellore, which is a marvelous college, and I was mentored by this amazing individual, Dr. Ramakrishna, who's the most patient man I've ever met. And briefly, this is my study design. Actually, his study design, which I helped him with. So there are 260 college-aged women that I work with, 18 to 22 years of age. The academic scores, which in my British way are called marks, we were using those as sort of a surrogate for cognition. And we took anthropometric data, which is height, weight, and waist-hip ratio. And in this case, you're kind of using height, since in previous studies we're seeing that height is really hard hit with repeated diarrhea in childhood. We're kind of using height as a surrogate for what happened to them when they were children. And there were other aspects of the study that I won't be talking about today, and that are being worked on as we speak. One is ApoE4, the other is iodine, which also has a massive role to play with brain development in childhood, and even in adulthood actually. and microbiota, because we are dependent upon many of them for nutritional absorption. Alright, so here's my data. You can see it probably, right? Alright, so the univariate result is that HAZ independently predicts marks, okay? And even after we control for factors like siblings and paternal education, we have a very significant correlation between height and marks. In this graph, you've got marks on the y-axis and marks as in academic performance on the y-axis, and HAZ on the x-axis. And you can see that as the height increases, you've got an increment in marks. Now, obviously, diarrhea is not the only determinant of your height. What's the other one? Obviously, genetics. So we hypothesize that once we control for that genetic contribution from the parents, this graph should get steeper and the correlation should get pretty solid. I mean, even more solid than it already is. It's pretty alarming to be finding this in 18, 22-year-old women. You know, I didn't think that I would. And interestingly, and probably more controversially, I also have this side piece of information, which is that number of siblings individually impacts the marks negatively. So the more siblings you have, in this graph, x-axis siblings, y-axis is marks again, and the more siblings you have, the fewer marks you're getting. Now this is very risky and controversial stuff, but it kind of plays into Gary Becker's idea of quantity versus quality trade-off. He was an economist who won the Nobel Prize. And there have been contradictory studies in China, Israel, and Bangladesh. So, you know, this area is ripe for investigation, and I think it's pretty interesting economics. Anyway, this brings me back to my little slide here, where I hope I showed you that diarrhea story is not limited to the school days they missed and the lives lost, because it's persisting into their adulthood and maybe holding them back, you know, from what they want to do, lowering their economic productivity, you know, decreasing our human capital. So that was my day job in India. Weekends were fun, because I got to take part in community health screenings. Fun. This was part of a celiac disease study, a massive one that's going on at Vellore right now. And it was amazing, because the crowds, this is a pretty small crowd. It used to be much larger than that, usually. And there's a tremendous language barrier, so I had to use translators. This poor lady, she had to translate for me. I feel so bad for her. That day, I think we saw 160 people together. And I had physician mentors who were keeping an eye on me, making sure I wasn't doing anything stupid. But it was really, really hard, because many times we came across cases. For example, on my very first day in one of these screenings, I came across someone with Parkinson's disease. And, you know, we've all been drilled as to how to treat Parkinson's disease. Levodopa and deep brain stimulation. And I was like, you know, we know what to do, let's do it. And they were like, well, he doesn't have the money, and there is no money to get him. And this is something I struggle with every day. And I became depressed, and which is weird, because I am Indian, I grew up in India. So why was I suddenly so affected by the amount of poverty I saw around me and disease, which is basically my eyes, as I've said earlier, just a manifestation of poverty. And on the other hand, these doctors, this is Karthik and this is German. They maintained their equanimity and they were pretty untouched by it. And I was very surprised, and I talked to them about it. And this is what one of them said. I live in the mindless vacuum of the Indian middle class, ensconced by work and immediate future concerns, with an occasional sympathetic nod to the misery around me. And I realized that this was a defense mechanism they have to deal, because, you know, if you were like me and just so ripped apart by what you saw, you'd be dysfunctional. And I think Gemini is being far too modest, because he's right there in the trenches, sort of, you know, treating people who are really poor, really, really poor. Many of them make under 99 cents a day. That's just, we cannot imagine this. We sitting here in our fancy clothes with this, we cannot imagine the poverty that was there. This is a common sight. That girl has protein-rich malnutrition. You can see she's got a distended abdomen, stick-thin limbs. And it was really amazing for me to be able to work with these kids, actually, because that was the research I was doing. I was trying to show that, yeah, you know, early childhood diarrhea is where it's at. You've got to treat that. And so it was really rewarding for me to be able to do that, deworm some children and counsel them nutritionally. This girl here was, no, it's not working for me yet, is 14 months old. So it was really amazing for me to do that. This child, however, absolutely broke my heart, and maybe solidified my resolve in some ways, because you know, I had to learn somewhat of lung and heart auscultation on the fly over there to be part of the screenings. And so I was listening to this guy's heart and I heard this loud swooshed up systolic murmur, which we know is mitral regurgitation. And I was like, this is great. I mean, well, it's not great, but it was a diagnostic triumph for a first-year medical student. And then I turned to one of my supervisors and said, what do we do about this now? And he says, well, I don't know what we can do. And I was like, well, you're going to send him to Pete's cards. No, well, I don't know if they have the money. So, I mean, I made a bit of a ruckus, and then this child ended up at pediatrics, and I'm sure you might notice, I don't think he should see over there, but he had potential malnutrition. So at least he was treated for that. But I was very cynical after this for one day. I was just like, what is the point of being here? What's the point of knowing how to diagnose these things if you can't treat them? What's the point? And that's when I realized that, triage is cool. With those kids who are debunked, I know for a fact that I made a difference. There's a study in Kenya that says that there's a 20% increase in wages for every extra year of debunking. So I know you can make a difference through triage, but we need a much larger difference, and that's why we need systemic changes. And so that kids like the one with mitral regurgitation can have a recourse to treatment. And that sort of really drove home to me, and that's why I think I came back wanting to do more activism and work towards becoming a public intellectual in this field. And the people I'd really like to thank, and I wouldn't be standing here without these people, they're my heroes. Dr. Anuradha for launching this scholarship, Dr. Ramakrishna for being so patient with an idiot like me, Dr. Guerrant for being just an incredible source of enthusiasm, April for dealing with my slacking and missing every deadline under the sun, and all these other people who really get an eye out for me. Shobna, she translated so much for me in India. Thank you so much, and any questions that we'd like to answer.
Thank you, Pranay, for that wonderful and incredibly poignant presentation. I think we have time for one or two questions. Sid.
I was wondering if you looked at the water samples that the students might be drinking. Did all of the students drink from the same water supply or water containers, or did they have different?
No, these were college women, and they came from diverse backgrounds. There were some hostelers there, and they did have a common food and water thing, but that was pretty clean. That was piped water and so on.
So yeah, I guess my question was talking about their original when
Yes,
they're young.
so yeah, there was we made a survey, and we were trying to assess for that, and we did ask whether you had tap water, whether you had sanitation, those things, and that data is still actually being processed. But I think their responses were a little bit unreliable, because I'd asked them after they answered, it didn't match up many times, so I'm hesitant to use that data. That's what. So, and Dr. Guerrant will tell you that the most reliable way to know about early childhood diarrhea is actually just looking at height, HSE. Yes.
I understand the frustration and the lack of the impotence one feels under these circumstances. If you had something that you could do, you can't change the entire system, but is there one particular hurdle that you think should be tackled?
This is a very hard question.
I don't know.
I think,
There's no wrong answer, is there?
well, I mean, I can give you a long-word answer from TED Talks, which would be the malnutrition. But I think it's education at the end of the day. It's really education, which is unbelievable. And convincing them. I think, and Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo do an excellent job of talking about this in their book, Poor Economics, which is that I think the frustration working with people who are so poor is that you come up with this massive wall of pessimism and this skepticism, honestly, because they feel like any intervention that can actually make a difference will take too long to make the difference. They can't see the long term like we can. And I think nudging them, giving lentils along with immunizations to make them come, and sort of focusing on preventative rather than curative medicine, I think that is the key, because I've seen so many of them who bankrupted themselves with an operation. And I think the problem in India, honestly, I talked to Dr. Ramakrishna about this with respect to cancer. I want to go into hemo, basically. And I was asking him about cancer. He said, you know what my real concern with cancer in India is? When someone comes to me with gastric cancer, my worry is that he's going to be drained economically by these fake doctors all around him, because we can't let our parents, that's the culture in India, that we can't let our parents die, it's just terrible without doing anything. And he's like, no, I have to teach them to let go and to sort of not lead themselves dead. So I think it's education, it's prevention, and preventing them from having those shocks of, the economic shock of a disease in their family. That is really the key. And we have to, I think, as medical students, we really need to take on this role of public intellectuals. We can't just be practitioners. We have to talk to people, we have to tell them about it, they listen to us. And so I try to blog about this a lot over the summer and disseminate information. But this is a very rambling answer, I'm so sorry, but